One base in the entire Soviet history had the US more worried than any other. The testing going on there could give the Soviets the ultimate advantage and lead to World War III. And that's no exaggeration. Also, there's likely no other base that was so secretive, which just added further to the concern. That base was Sary Shagan, in the middle of a desert. And this site is absolutely massive. Figures will vary depending on the year and how you count it, but it's roughly 50 to 85,000 square kilometers. That's 10 times the size of the somewhat similar White Sands Missile Test Range in the US, and 7 times larger than the entire Nevada Test and Training Range, including Area 51. And speaking of Area 51, it, along with its related site, Kapustin Yar, have been called the Soviet Union's Area 51, or Roswell, and that's due to its intense secrecy and some strange sightings and claims. And furthermore, the two are somewhat connected in another way. In a way, Area 51 was actually built to test and fly aircraft to spy on Sary Shagan. And for good reason. It was where the most advanced and secretive weapon projects were tested. From missiles to stop US nuclear strikes, to lasers 10 times more powerful than anything today to destroy satellites. But real quick, our sponsor, Ground News. It's a unique idea that helps to give people the whole picture of what's going on. So often today, each side will downplay negative stories, or just completely twist a story to push their own agenda, especially with the US election coming up. It may give you a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling to hear that you're right, but you will never find out the truth that way, which is where Ground News comes in. Ground News takes stories from across the political spectrum and puts them side by side. They have a wide array of tools to help show coverage details, compare headlines, and their bias distribution, which shows each source for each story, all of which allows you to easily see the differences in coverage on the same news stories, helping show where certain stories and details are exaggerated and others leaving out the key facts. It's a really incredible website and app they have. I've worked with them many times in the past, and I've had several people mention how they tried it and really enjoy it. So go on over to ground.news/covertcabal, or just scan the QR code here to get the full picture on current news topics, without being manipulated or seeing only half the story. And if you use my link, you'll get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan this month. Again, that's Ground News. Sary Shagan is mostly well known for its testing of anti-ballistic missile systems, things like the A-35 and the later A-135 that's currently defending Moscow today. These systems concern the US, as well as the Soviets were concerned about US ABM systems, eventually leading to the ABM Treaty in 1972 that limited their deployment. There was a real fear at the time that one side might be able to design and build a system that would completely stop the other's nuclear missiles, which would throw deterrence out the window and greatly increase the odds of World War III. But the site was also heavily involved in testing the more typical air defense systems as well, such as the S-300. Work began in 1973 on the system, missile flight test in 75, and it finally became operational in 1979. An interesting fact though is it was never used in actual combat until more than 40 years later in 2020. The S-300 was a major leap in air defense technology. It had the mobility of shorter range systems, yet the range of the larger fixed systems. And the system is still widely used today, including the S-400, which is basically just an S-300 with new missiles and radars to guide them. But taking a break from missiles, Sary Shagan also has a long history in testing aircraft, most notably the 60th Mixed Test Aviation Division. This US spy satellite imagery from 1966 shows Kambala Air Base just packed full of all types of aircraft, from helicopters, to fighters, to bombers, to jamming aircraft, and more. Well over 100 aircraft can be seen alone in this image. And finally, the most interesting type of work at Sary Shagan, and the one connecting it to numerous conspiracy theories, comes from the development of anti-satellite weapons, including the most ambitious and powerful laser weapons ever built. The first one was Omega, in the late 60s and early 70s. It was more designed for ballistic missiles, but anti-satellite capability was the ultimate objective. However, after years of testing, they basically came to the conclusion that it was impossible and it would never work, and it'd just be better to stick with the typical rocket-based systems. But laser weapons have a funny history. Both the Soviets, now Russia, and the US, even to this day, keep repeating the same cycle. They spend a massive amount of money on a new laser system only to cancel it due to insurmountable problems. Then, a decade or so later, they try again. They spend a massive amount of money on a new system only to cancel it for the same reasons. And this has been going on for over half a century. For the Soviets, after Omega came Terra 3, built right next to the Omega. Terra 3 apparently really worried the Pentagon. This was not long after that anti-ballistic missile treaty was signed, and the US presidential election of 1980 was in full swing. And this was the time that Ronald Reagan was campaigning on rebuilding and restoring the US military strength. Soon after, reports of a new powerful laser weapon the Soviets were building started to come out. To many, it reminded them of the bomber gap and the missile gap in the 50s and 60s, and they dismissed it. But as we know now, the system was very real. It seemed the Soviets were building their own STI, or Star Wars program. That Terra 3 laser also spurred numerous conspiracy theories, the most famous being that it was used against the Space Shuttle Challenger while it was in orbit. The claim goes that it caused the crew to become ill, it damaged systems, and some claim it was the reason why the Challenger failed and exploded just over a year later. Other rumors include that it was used to shoot down a UFO in 1983, and that the debris and the alien remains were collected and sent to Omsk for study. Now, I should be clear that there's no real evidence whatsoever for either of these theories being true. In the end, Terra 3, despite some claims of successful tests, turned out to be like every other laser weapon, a failure. When US officials visited the site in 1989, they found that it was nowhere near capable enough, nor did they have the technology necessary to ever make it work. The remains of Terra 3 can still be seen today, however, it's in complete ruin. In fact, pretty much the entire base is a pretty depressing sight to look at. The site that once struck fear into the US, wondering what new superweapons the Soviets might be developing, is virtually gone. Where once huge complexes stood, tracking objects in space, like NIP-3, or even that airbase which hosted hundreds of aircraft, now just lies in ruins. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Sary Shagan found itself in a different country, Kazakhstan. Despite that, Russia still uses the base today, albeit on a much smaller scale. Recently, they've been testing the latest anti-ballistic missile and anti-satellite system, the A-235, which was used to shoot down a satellite in 2021. So the site still lives on, just with less activity, less advanced research, and less UFO conspiracies.